It's Friday, so I don't know when this video is actually going to post, but it's Friday. And the sun finally came out, which is great because it's been raining here in Charlotte, and which we're very thankful for because we haven't had a lot of rain in the last couple of months.
Oh, yeah.
Not to bore everybody talking about the weather. On to a more exciting topic, which is junk removal within the corporate world. So Ted, you and I come from corporate backgrounds. We actually met at our IT jobs. You were CMO there. I was an entry-level sales rep, a lowly peasant. And we worked together. And we obviously got acquainted very quickly with how organizations, specifically large ones, we focused on 500 million to, over $1 billion in revenue type accounts. And what you learn very quickly is these companies can't just pull a trigger and buy something on a whim. They might have a threshold of if it's $50, they can. But if you're selling anything IT related or other services that gets up into the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of spend, these organizations have very streamlined and strict processes that they have to stick to internally, very much so around IT services. And I think the same was true for outsourced services, anything around HR, payroll, operations. But I never really heard much about site services, and taking it a little bit further, specifically waste management services or junk removal services, which you and I are obviously in now. And over our tenure in starting Junk Reader, we obviously have done a lot of work for corporate accounts and commercial type accounts, but mainly because they have come inbound to us. And obviously one of our big initiatives as a company that we think is going to be pretty strategic and important for us in the next 3 to 5 years is to go outbound and acquire more, simply because main reason being that the cost of acquisition is cheaper, surprisingly to a lot of folks, including myself probably, to go and do that versus relying on inbound leads from Google AdWords, which is kind of our main spend in the marketing category today to help drive sales, leads, and revenue. So with that said, I guess to kind of open up the conversation about corporate accounts within the junk removal space, over to you, Ted, of how important is it for us on the junk removal side, the vendor side, to have corporate accounts? And then in parallel, why is it important for those corporate accounts to look at streamlining their site service processes and needs? Because not to derail the conversation or take it over here, but I think a lot of companies, especially ones that have a lot of stores out in the field, a big footprint, physical footprint, it comes down to the store level, and district managers, store managers, they just reach out to whoever to come pick up their junk, at least in our experience. We believe that should be streamlined, if it's not already, at the corporate level of these accounts. And sometimes it is. But why is it important to have it streamlined versus the traditional way, which is just store managers reaching out to any Joe Blow they can find on the internet or on Craigslist or wherever? So over to you to talk about why it's important for us, but also why it's important for our customers.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I remember when you first posed it, it sounded a little bit fancy for our audience to a degree because of our backgrounds. But the more I thought about it, I was thinking, if we were just starting off again and this kind of a video was out there, this kind of content was out there almost day one or even before we started, I think it would have, to an extent, it would have changed our business model, meaning it took us a long time to fully appreciate. I mean, we always understood why corporate accounts were so valuable, but when you understand how much that consumes of some of the bigger players' portfolio, you're talking, I think we've seen stats, 70% or more of their revenue is related to or tied to corporate accounts, which is massive. Why that matters so much, I'll talk about it first on the business side, meaning if you're in this industry, and then I'll get into if you're on the other side of the fence. It matters so much for obvious reasons because it represents recurring revenue, number one. Number two, to your point about Google Ads, which is our biggest expense, and most junk removal companies that know what they're doing, that's going to be their biggest expense. Now, I've heard many people say, especially on Facebook groups, I've heard many people talk about how over time SEO can and should overtake that. I have never seen that to be true. That to me is like, the Bigfoot. It's rumored to be out there somewhere, but I've yet to find a single company that can show me, that can prove. I mean, if you really believe that, show me your numbers. Let me see your P&L. Let me see your actual spend. What I think is more likely is that people are seeing more repeat referral business, but not getting completely away from Google Ads, where it only represents 5% of your spend. If you're doing significant numbers, if you're doing 100K plus a month, you're still spending a lot of money in Google Ads. This is an area where you can legitimately get away from spending so much money in Google Ads is by having corporate accounts. We have seen this. We've experienced it. We've seen significant revenue come in month over month from a single corporate account, not to mention multiples. So here's a great example. You're talking about the weather. When it's raining on the residential side, junk removal virtually shuts down. People just aren't interested in having people come in and out of their home, even in their garage, when it's pouring rain. But it's a little different on the commercial side, especially when you have, whether it's apartments that you have to take care of, it could be storage units, it could be realtors that you're helping out, it could be big box retailers. Rain or shine, business must go on. So that's why commercial accounts are so much better regardless of the weather. They want you coming out. Okay, so if you're in the corporate world, why junk removal as a procurement category makes so much sense is because in virtually any corporate environment, even smaller businesses, you're going to have bulky items that oftentimes the city's not going to take, and even finding a vendor can be very tricky. I know every business for the most part is going to say customer service is really our calling card, and it's just not true. We all know it's not true. Customer service is increasingly harder and harder. Outstanding customer service is increasingly harder and harder to come by. We know because we live this every single day, as evidenced by our Google reviews and our happy customers. We know that it literally is the hallmark of our business. It's everything we hang our hat on. Yes, we have good processes, procedures, and employees, but the fact that we go out of our way to ensure that we answer every call. If we ever miss a call, it's probably 1 out of 100. Even that may not be accurate. And if we do, we call them right back. We text them, and we make sure that we're on top of everything they need. And that's especially true with corporate clients. An example would be some of the corporate clients that we do have. We are so ingrained with that account, with what they need, that we actually are embedded in their internal systems, which is a testament really to the quality of work that we provide. So they trust us so much, not just to perform the physical service, but to go in there with their corporate tools, their tech stack, and actually manipulate those the way they would internally. That's a big testament to who we are. So I think if you're on the corporate side of things, you want to look at a partner that is trusted to that extent, that really has a corporate background, that you're not worried about what are they going in and doing when they're inside your system. Because of our backgrounds, I think that does give us an advantage over most. And then I would say the last thing is just the responsiveness. I mean, we know, sometimes not so good for our families, but we know that we are absolutely married to this business. When calls come in, even if it's after hours, if we cannot answer that call, which is rare, even if it's 10 p.m. or later, we're texting, we're emailing, we're getting back. We've always got a sense of urgency with how we run our business. And part of that, again, goes back to corporate America. We know that that's the way it works. We know that in that world, that's what they expect, that attention to detail and the fact that you're always putting their business in front. They always want to feel like our business or their business is the most important one in our world. So we try to really live by that philosophy. So I would say that's the answer on either side, whether you're a residential customer, commercial customer, that's the perspective that we bring.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, the obvious things are on the junk rate or vendor side. The obvious things are like bigger jobs, reoccurring revenue, as you mentioned. But I think the bigger value add for us that at least I've come to realize over the last couple of months is that spend. As soon as it's so expensive to acquire a customer that you need to be able to retain it however you acquire it. But on the front end, we'd much prefer to go out and leverage our existing corporate accounts and try to network and get referrals and or expand within that corporate account because we've already paid for the lead in some way or fashion, whether that was an inbound Google AdWord that we paid $100 for, you and I just spending time, or, maybe we've got a CSR that does outbound calls. Like we're paying somebody something, whether that's Google or somebody else internally, to go and get these leads. But I think we're at least my mind shift has been recently is now and going into the future, like we have to figure out a way to not only reduce our ad spend, but also get more out of the customers that we do have, the lifetime value of the customers. And you're going to find that, I don't want to say easier, you're just going to find more of it in corporate accounts. Like we've got some really, really great residential clients that keep coming back to us time and time again. But their jobs they're going to pale in comparison to somebody like a Costco or a Walmart or anybody, a property management company that will always have needs much more frequently and typically in larger volumes because they're servicing more people. And so for me, that's kind of the big push on our side as to why we need more corporate accounts. We have a lot, like I said, but I think we can go get more and also get more within the accounts that we're in. That's another probably topic is just like, how do you weave through a corporate organization to get more business, right? Like you've gotten business with them to do junk removal at a single site. You knocked it out of the park. You were really responsive. You answered the first call. You were nice on the phone. They sang your praises. You got on site same or next day. You took care of the job. Your pricing was fine. You were fully insured. Your guys were nice. You invoiced them. You gave them 30-day payment terms. But how do you replicate that story to other store managers or district managers or whoever it was that came to you and asked for that initial service? Like a storage unit complex. We were just at one yesterday. Been trying to prospect into them for a year. Yeah. Finally got onboarded a long time ago. But even then, a lot of these store managers either didn't know we were onboarded or just kind of that was their default like thing to turn us away every time we dropped in, or they already had a partner that they were using that they were partial to for whatever reason, and they just didn't ever want to give us the chance. But like we did a phenomenal job yesterday of convincing somebody to give us a shot, but two, also doing the job at a good price very quickly. They felt comfortable with our guys being there. But now it's our job, balls back in our court, to figure out how to go. And, they've got, I'm going to say 20 or 30 properties just here in the Charlotte and Greensboro market, not including national. Like we need to be inside of all those. But the story, like how do you carry that story? That's obviously out for us to decide. But that's why it's so important, on our side as to why the corporate accounts are important. Going back to the client side, I think what you and I can pull from our time in the corporate world is a lot of the cliche stuff of like, what are your headaches? You remember that from back in the day? Yeah. Let's put this into marketing slicks. Let's talk about it on the website. You guys, anytime you get on an initial call, just ask the customer what their pain points are. What are your headaches? But like, obviously there's some truth to that. I just hate using cliche terms. But when you go and talk to corporate people, whether that's a regional manager, VP, a district manager, or somebody in procurement, they are going to have things that just really bug them. And if you as a vendor can help solve that, even at a minimal degree, they're going to like you and they're going to come back more and more. For us, it kind of falls within the site services bucket, at least what I've found. Like most companies aren't going out and just like procuring junk removal services just randomly as its own like line item. Most are lumping it under site services being also the vendors they use for any of their plumbing needs, their HVAC needs, if they have a roofing issue, a pipe burst, the contracts they have with the dumpster companies that they use, like Republic Services or whoever, right? So junk removal falls into that category. And yet I still think we're on somewhat of an infancy place with corporations looking at junk removal as we really need to figure this out. Like we know it's within site services, but we kind of consume it on an as needed basis. And there's really no process around it. Like we just let the store managers do what they want to do. But there is a value add to somebody somewhere within these corporations to have a single provider. And maybe it's not a national provider, certainly a value add there. If you have a junk removal company that can cover the nation, then you get into all sorts of questions there. But even just a regional or like, oh, we only use this company in this specific market, like for us in Charlotte and Greensboro, there's a value add for us being the one junk removal partner for Mr. Customer in this market, so they can get better payment terms. They know what the level of service is going to be. They know that I had this call yesterday with one of the storage, the example I used previously with the storage unit guy, and the same headaches that he had, like he was expressing on the phone after he opened up a little bit. And that was just the same stuff I always hear, which is, I work with a company that I've never really had many problems with them, but lately, like they're not super responsive. They told me they'd be out here on Monday. It's now Wednesday. I haven't heard from them. I haven't seen them. Their pricing is kind of just all over the map. Like the same stuff. Like what if none of your people had to deal with that? They just clicked, the easy button, put a work order in with corporate and said, I need a junk pickup on Tuesday. And Junk Raider or whoever is there on Tuesday between the 9 and 11 slot. And you have a general idea of how that's going to be priced because you know the load size. You know that you don't need to pay on site because they've got that all set up with corporate. It's on net 30 payment terms and it all works through in the back end. Like it's very obvious to us. I don't know that it's super obvious to corporations. I think some corporations probably have it like pretty good, but like most of them don't, especially those that have a large footprint of offices, warehouses, storage units, apartments, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I think you've covered this category really well. And I kudos to you for really recognizing it and pushing for it. And as evidenced even this episode today, I would just say to any potential companies that have found this video, have found Junk Raider and really are in need, do your homework. I think not only is Google a great place to start just so you can look at those reviews, but don't just look at the star rating, but really read some of those reviews to get a sense of who you're dealing with, because we also do have corporate accounts that have gone on there and sang our praises, but also do your due diligence to make sure they have the insurance requirements, that they have the technical expertise, whether it's working with your systems, or is there a certain type of equipment that we need to bring? I think just by asking the right questions, you'll get a sense very quickly who you're dealing with and the level of professionalism, their acumen that they bring to the table. And that really matters in the long run, especially because if you have a relationship that's ongoing, you want a partner that is easy to work with and is highly professional and checks all the boxes. They have insurance, they have the right trucks, the right personnel, everyone's been trained properly. So I would say just make sure you're doing your homework. But if you have any questions, we're always here to answer them.
I would add one more thing to that, Ted. So great point. In that same vein, like just pick up the phone and call some places. Back to our life in the IT world with corporate, like we could hop on a phone call with a customer and have a certain level of conversation where they may be like, yeah, you know what you're talking about, or you don't know as much as what you're talking about as maybe somebody else I just spoke with before you. And then they could go on and have 3, 4, 5 other phone calls with similar providers to us. And the calls would be very similar, right? Like everybody would show up. They'd show up with multiple people, usually like a sales rep and maybe a technical person. And those calls would flow kind of the same way. And as a customer, digesting all of those different vendors and the information they do or don't provide can be somewhat difficult. And then you get into like pricing proposals and you kind of weed out people from others. Within the junk removal space, it's not that difficult. Yeah. Like just call some companies and you will weed out the first 5 you call because they just don't answer. Or you call them and they make you sit through a 5-minute call bridge and you're just like, screw this, I'm hanging up. Mm-hmm. And then you'll get on the phone with somebody like us. We're biased, of course, but you're gonna be like, oh, this is refreshing. Like this is a nice voice. They seem very helpful. They answered on the first ring. Their reviews look great. They talked to me about their pricing, their process, how they work. They're cool with, payment terms. They have insurance, which is great. They have multiple trucks. All of their guys are in-house guys. They're not subcontracted out. Like you're going to get that story from us. And then the next guy you call will be like, hello. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can do it. Are you insured? Yeah, we're insured. You'll figure it out very quickly if you just call some of these providers. And that's not to bag our industry or say we've got a lot of bad apples out there, but there are. You'll get a sense of I guess what I'm saying is not every junk removal company is well set up to service corporate accounts. So with that, that's the last thing I'll say on this episode. I wanted to maybe get into another topic, but I think we'll save it for another day about just where you're showing up in the digital world when people search for junk removal. I think I sent you something about ChatGPT earlier today. We can take that on to another episode, but yeah, I think this was a good one.
No, this was a good one. Well, hopefully you guys got some value out of it. As always, if you have questions, leave it in the comments below. Or you can reach us on the phone, 704-594-1271. You can also visit us online at junkraider.com. Until next time.
Bye.